Evelyn Carter wasn't running from something. At least that's what she told herself when she packed up her old Ford pickup and left everything behind. The city, the hospital, the steady rhythm of monitors beeping through fluorescent-lit nights, all of it was in the rearview mirror now. What waited ahead was quiet. Solitude. A small wooden cabin tucked deep into the foothills of eastern Oregon, surrounded by thousands of untamed acres and a silence so heavy it nearly pressed against her skin. The morning air was crisp, biting gently at her cheeks as she stepped barefoot onto the creaking porch. Autumn had painted the forest in shades of amber, rust, and gold. Dry leaves rustled in the wind, and somewhere beyond the hills, a creek whispered its way through the earth. She liked the stillness. It was the reason she came here. For nearly 50 years, Evelyn had worked as a nurse. Not just in any hospital, but in the kind of ER where time was always against you. Where life clung by a thread and hands went cold too fast. She had held too many people through their final breath. Some had gone peacefully, others not. But each left her with that same hollow ache. She had seen so much life leave the world, and now, in retirement, she didn't know how to live with the absence it left behind. Her once proud shoulders, now frail, were wrapped in a cardigan 2 sizes too big. Her silver hair, pulled back into a loose bun, framed a face worn by more than just years. It bore the grief of memory, the burden of care. She had come to this place hoping to find peace. Maybe even purpose. Or at the very least, a corner of the world where no one needed her anymore. That morning, Evelyn laced up the same weathered leather boots she'd worn through a dozen winters and walked the dirt path behind her cabin. Her body moved automatically, her thoughts scattered like the windblown leaves beneath her feet. The forest had become her sanctuary, a place that asked nothing of her. She walked each day, hoping to convince herself that this air, this silence, was enough. But then the silence broke. At first, it was faint. A breath. A low, shuddering exhale filled with pain. Evelyn froze mid-step, the hair on her arms standing on end. It came again, closer this time. Her heartbeat quickened. Though she wasn't a nurse anymore, her instincts surged to the surface. Pain had a sound, and this sound she knew all too well. Without thinking, she moved toward it. Branches scratched her arms, uneven earth shifted beneath her boots, but she didn't stop. The forest opened into a clearing, and there he was. A Mustang. A wild horse. He was breathtaking and broken all at once. His coat, nearly black and streaked with dried blood, clung to trembling muscles. He lay on his side, ribs heaving with each painful breath. One hind leg was twisted unnaturally beneath him. Claw marks scored his flank, likely from a mountain lion. He had fought and survived, but only barely. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. In all her years, she had seen bodies like this before, not horses, but humans. Soldiers fresh from war zones. Elderly men who had fallen and shattered their hips. Young men pulled from the wreckage of twisted steel. Each one had that same look, fear, pain, confusion. "I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered. She lowered herself to her knees, moving slowly, every gesture deliberate. Just like she had done in hospital rooms hundreds of times before. Move too fast, they panic. Move too slow, they give up. The horse's dark eyes locked onto hers. Wild. Uncertain. But not afraid. Not yet. Evelyn reached out, her hand trembling slightly from both the cold and the gravity of the moment. She hadn't touched another living soul since the day she left the hospital. Yet here she was, kneeling in damp dirt, face to face with a creature that embodied pain and survival. Her fingertips brushed his flank. He flinched, a tremor running through his entire body. She paused, whispering softly, "It's okay. I know it hurts." The Mustang's muscles were rigid, his nostrils flaring with every uneven breath. He was all instinct and tension, yet somehow he stayed still. Evelyn moved her hands gently down his leg, fingers tracing the line of a sprain, swollen and red. Not broken, but bad. He wouldn't survive out here like this. She swallowed hard, memories flooding in, veterans trembling on gurneys, children with feverish eyes, elderly patients whispering, "Don't let me go," as their grip weakened. She had always let go. She had to. But now. Her throat tightened. Something unspoken stirred inside her. "I've got you," she said aloud, her voice firmer now. "I've got you." She didn't have gauze. No morphine. No call button for help. Just a weathered mind, a nurse's hands, and a heart bruised from years of losing. But she knew what she had to do. She had made peace with many endings in her life, but this one, maybe, didn't have to end. Her eyes scanned the terrain between them and the cabin. It felt impossibly far. But she couldn't leave him. She wouldn't. Taking a deep breath, she shifted her body beside his. "Come on, boy. We'll figure this out." It wasn't just him she was trying to save. In a way, it was herself too. Destiny. That was the name that came to her unbidden, like a whisper carried on the breeze. She didn't question it. The Mustang had survived when he shouldn't have. And she, after all her years surrounded by death, was finally trying to breathe again. Destiny lay still as Evelyn pressed gently into his side, encouraging him. "Let's get you home." It was a strange word to say aloud. Home. Could this place, this forest cabin and silence and pine, ever truly be that again? He shifted under her touch, hesitant, trembling. She felt his effort in her bones. His forelegs moved first, scratching against the dirt as he fought gravity. With a groan, he lifted himself partially up. Evelyn braced herself, anchoring him, guiding him like she had so many others through impossible recoveries. Step by painful step, they inched through the trees. Her legs burned. Her back screamed. Sweat soaked her clothes despite the chill. Destiny stumbled once, nearly collapsing. She didn't let go. Couldn't. She had let go of so many, too many, and this time, she was holding on. Finally, the cabin came into view. The old firewood lean-to beside it would have to do. It offered a slanted roof and partial walls. No stall, no stable, but shelter. It was enough. As Destiny lowered himself into the straw-strewn corner of the lean-to, Evelyn dropped beside him, exhausted. She reached out and pressed her hand to his neck. His breath, still heavy, blew warm against her arm. "You did good," she murmured. And then, unexpectedly, achingly, he leaned into her touch. Something inside her cracked wide open. She cleared her throat and blinked back tears. "No," she whispered. "No getting attached." But the moment had already settled between them, soft, fragile, real. Inside, she found her old nurse's kit. She hadn't used it in years. Not since retirement. But her hands moved with practiced familiarity, wrapping his injured leg with strips of cloth torn from old sheets, cleaning the claw wounds along his flank. As she worked, Destiny watched her with those deep, unreadable eyes. "Don't look at me like that," she muttered. "I already made my choice." And she had. The forest had given her solitude. But Destiny had given her purpose again. The next morning, a pale mist lingered between the trees like a secret not yet spoken. Evelyn stood on the porch, a cup of steaming black coffee in her hands, the scent of pine and damp soil mixing with the crisp autumn air. Her eyes stayed fixed on the lean-to where Destiny lay curled beneath the weathered roof, his breath rising in visible plumes. He had made it through the night. That was something. But trust? That would take longer. Evelyn had spent decades reading the nonverbal language of dying patients, the subtle grip of a weakening hand, the way eyes lingered on loved ones, knowing it would be their last glance. She could hear more in a sigh than in a sentence. But this was different. Destiny spoke no language she understood. He didn't reach for her. He didn't cry. His body told the story, ears swiveling at every sound, tail twitching, muscles tense just beneath the surface. He didn't trust her yet. Not fully. And she didn't blame him. She approached him slowly, crouching near the shelter with the calm patience honed over a lifetime in emergency rooms. "Morning," she said softly. Destiny didn't move. Not away. Not toward her. She sat, watching him. And waited. That was something she had learned, don't force it. Not with frightened children in ER beds, not with grieving families, and certainly not with a half-wild horse who had survived a predator's claws. She gave him space. Minutes passed in silence. Then, slowly, barely noticeably, he shifted. Not away. Toward her. Evelyn's breath caught. He rested his head against the earth, eyes half closed. Not asleep. But no longer afraid. She reached out, her hand hovering, then brushing along his shoulder. His coat was still rough, still matted, but it no longer trembled beneath her fingers. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Carter didn't feel like a ghost in her own life. She felt seen. Needed. Home. By afternoon, Destiny was standing again. Not with ease. He still favored his injured leg. But he was up, moving slowly around the small clearing beyond the cabin. Evelyn sat in the dirt beside the lean-to, her back against a wooden post, arms crossed over her flannel shirt. "You're stubborn," she muttered, watching him tilt his head toward the tree lean. His ears flicked, nostrils flaring slightly at her voice. She smirked. "Yeah, you heard me." He huffed, tossing his mane. It made her chuckle, a dry, quiet sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. That night, after he settled beneath the shelter, she lit a lantern and opened the old Buddhist philosophy book that had been gathering dust on her shelf. She hadn't read it since moving to the cabin. Back then, she thought she needed to learn how to let go. Now, she wasn't sure she had ever known how. Her eyes found a familiar passage. To hold something too tightly is to lose it. To let go is to gain everything. Her throat tightened. She looked out toward the lean-to. Destiny's shape was a shadow beneath the moonlight, still and steady. "I'm not keeping you," she whispered into the night. "I know you're not mine." But the ache in her chest told her she wanted him to be. She fell asleep in her rocking chair, the stars above like distant eyes, watching over a woman who had spent a lifetime letting go, and now, maybe for the first time, was trying to hold on. The next morning brought a deceptive calm. The sun filtered through the trees in wide, golden shafts. Evelyn rocked slowly on her porch, a hot mug of tea warming her hands. Destiny stood near the edge of the clearing, ears flicking lazily, tail swishing as he soaked in the light. His coat no longer looked dull. His movements were surer, more balanced. He was healing. But something else stirred beneath the surface, restlessness. Evelyn saw it in the way he turned his head toward the tree lean, nostrils flaring, muscles flexing beneath his skin. He was watching something. Listening to something. Something that called to him, something wild. She followed his gaze and tried not to let the unease creep in. Then the sound came. Tires. Crunching gravel. Her stomach dropped. No one ever came out here. The only road was barely a trail, used by wildlife and Evelyn alone. She set her tea down slowly and rose to her feet, spine straightening with old resistance. She had chosen this life, this isolation, because it promised freedom. Peace. A white government truck came into view. Emblazoned on the side. Bureau of Land Management. A man stepped out. Tall, maybe mid-40s, lean with the build of a rancher. His boots were dusted with dried earth. His brown jacket hung open just enough to show the badge clipped to his belt. He removed his sunglasses, revealing steady eyes beneath a weathered hat brim. "Morning, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Jake Holloway. I'm with the BLM. Evelyn didn't move. Her arms crossed instinctively over her chest. "What do you want?" she asked, voice cool. Jake nodded toward Destiny, who had frozen at the sound of the truck, ears pinned, eyes locked on the stranger. "We've had reports of an injured wild Mustang around here," Jake said calmly. "Figured I'd check it out." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I found him a few days ago," she said. "He was dying. I helped him." Jake's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in the wrapped leg, the calm way the horse stood near her. A line formed between his brows. "I appreciate the compassion," he said. "But you know it's illegal to keep a wild horse. Even nursing one back to health can cross a line." Her breath left her in a slow, heated exhale. "He would have died out there." Jake didn't flinch. "Nature's cruel," he replied. "But it's not ours to control." "I was a nurse for almost 50 years, Evelyn shot back. "You think I can just stand by and watch something suffer when I could help?" Jake's gaze softened just a bit. "I don't think you're the kind of person who lets things go easily." "You'd be right," she said. He sighed, adjusting his belt. "Look. I'm not writing you up. Not today. But if he's still here next time I check in, I won't have a choice." He turned back to the truck, pausing with one foot on the step. "If you really want to help him," he added over his shoulder, "you might want to think about letting him go." And then he was gone. His words lingered in the dust behind him. Evelyn stood in the silence long after the truck had disappeared down the trail. Her hands were clenched at her sides. Her pulse thudded in her ears. "Let him go." She turned toward Destiny, who hadn't moved. He stood still as stone, watching her, as if he somehow understood what had just been said. What it meant. She pressed a hand to her chest, swallowing hard. Had she saved him, or had she trapped him? The question struck deep. She had spent her life letting go, hadn't she? When her patients took their last breaths. When her husband died quietly in the early hours of morning, his hand no longer able to hold hers. She thought she had mastered the art of release. Of not holding on too tightly. But Destiny? He was different. There was no prognosis. No DNR order. No final scan or monitor flatlining. There was only a choice. And for the first time, it was hers. She stepped inside the cabin, her feet heavy, her mind full. The old Buddhist text still lay open on the side table. Letting go of what you think you possess. Her eyes blurred. The word struck her like a confession. She had called it care. Compassion. Protection. But had she just been clinging to him for her own sake? She barely slept that night. And when the dawn came, she made her decision. She stepped outside before the sun fully rose. The forest was still, wrapped in a breathless hush. Destiny stood near the trees, his body turned not toward her, but toward freedom. She walked to him. Not with authority. Not as a caretaker. As a woman finally ready to do the hardest thing she'd ever done. "You're ready," she said, her voice shaking. He turned, meeting her gaze. Something flickered in his eyes, an unspoken question. "Are you sure?" No. She wasn't. But she nodded anyway. "You don't belong to me." She stepped back. Destiny hesitated, then took a step. Another. She didn't call him. Didn't beg. She had done that before, clinging to hands she couldn't save. This time, she let go. And when he disappeared into the trees, she stood there for a long time. Alone. But free. The clearing felt colder without him. Evelyn stood on the porch, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of lukewarm tea. She hadn't touched it. Couldn't. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tree lean where Destiny had vanished hours earlier, his dark coat swallowed by the forest's shadows. The place he had stood, the place that had become part of her daily rhythm, was now just empty. She had let him go. It was the right thing. She told herself that again and again. But the ache in her chest told another story. The forest was the same. Still wild. Still untamed. But now it felt different. Not like solitude. Not like peace. Like absence. She had known this feeling before. She had felt it in hospital rooms after a patient passed, the machines silent, the bed empty. She had felt it in her home after her husband's funeral, where the sound of his cane no longer echoed on the floorboards. But this time was different. This time, she had chosen the loss. She walked the trails again, but her feet dragged. She read her books, but the words fell flat. Even the wind in the trees felt like it whispered his name. She found herself returning to the lean-to, brushing her fingers along the beams, remembering the warmth of his body pressed into the straw. She had told herself she was keeping him safe. But deep down, maybe he had been the one keeping her safe. And now that safety was gone. She didn't expect to see him again. The days passed slowly. Then a week. Then another. She stopped listening for hooves. Stopped scanning the trees. She told herself he belonged to the wild now. That he had found what he was always meant for. But one afternoon, while rinsing an old dish by the creek, she heard it. A sound she hadn't realized she'd been longing for. Hoofbeats. Rhythmic. Familiar. Her breath caught. She turned quickly, water splashing across her boots, eyes darting through the trees. Nothing. Leaves rustled. The breeze stirred the surface of the creek. Wishful thinking. That night, she dreamed of him, of a shadow moving through the trees, of dark eyes watching from the edge of the clearing. Of trust that hadn't broken, only traveled. When she awoke, the silence felt heavier than before. Another week passed. And then, he came back. She heard him before she saw him, the unmistakable rhythm of hooves on hardened earth, the snort of warm breath, the rustle of movement just beyond the tree lean. She stepped onto the porch, her hand gripping the railing. There he was. Destiny. Standing tall, his coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. Stronger now. Freer. But he wasn't alone. A second horse stood beside him. Then another. A small herd. Wild and beautiful. Evelyn blinked, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks. But it was real. Destiny had brought them here. She stepped down slowly, the weight of the moment wrapping around her like a soft wind. Destiny didn't move. He just watched her, calm, steady, waiting. She took a step forward. So did he. And just like that, the silence broke. Not with noise. But with presence. With understanding. He hadn't returned because he was lost. He had come back because he had found something worth sharing. And in that moment, Evelyn Carter realized, letting go hadn't meant losing. It had meant opening the door to something far greater. The golden light of morning bathed the clearing in soft color, the forest damp from a light rain the night before. Evelyn stood on her porch, both hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. Her old rocking chair creaked beneath her, a sound that had once been the only rhythm in her life. Now, another rhythm stirred the landscape. Destiny grazed near the edge of the trees, surrounded by the herd he had brought with him. They moved like shadows in the sunlight, quiet, sure, free. No fences. No halters. No walls between them and the world. And yet, they stayed. Evelyn still wasn't used to the sight. For so long, she believed solitude was her only path to peace. That cutting ties was how she'd heal. That letting go meant choosing to be alone. But now, she saw it differently. Peace didn't mean isolation. Peace meant knowing she was part of something, something living, breathing, unpredictable. Something wild. Destiny hadn't come back because she had tamed him. He wasn't tame. He never would be. He had come back because, in some quiet, unspoken way, they belonged to each other, not as owner and animal, not as rescuer and rescued, but as companions who had healed together. Later that day, a truck pulled up the trail. Evelyn already knew who it would be. Jake Holloway stepped out, his boots crunching the gravel. His eyes swept the clearing, landing on the Mustangs grazing nearby. When he saw Destiny, standing proudly among them, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Well," he muttered, "I'll be damned." Evelyn crossed her arms, one brow raised. "Didn't think he'd come back, did you?" Jake chuckled softly, rubbing his jaw. "Wild horses don't usually do that." She turned her gaze to Destiny. "Maybe he's not just a wild horse." Jake was quiet for a long beat. Then he nodded, slowly, as if coming to terms with something unspoken. "You know," he said, "technically, they're not being kept. They're free. Free to come and go as they please." Evelyn smiled, the wind lifting a strand of silver hair from her face. "That's right." Jake looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, his expression softened with respect. "Then I don't see a problem here." Their eyes met. No more threats. No more warnings. Only understanding. That evening, Evelyn sat outside as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. The herd moved slowly through the clearing, their hooves pressing soft prints into the earth. Destiny stood closest, grazing calmly, occasionally lifting his head to glance in her direction. He didn't need to come any closer. He already had. She opened her book again, the Buddhist text with its weathered corners and familiar lines. Her fingers stopped on the passage she had come to understand, not just in theory, but in truth. Letting go of what you think you possess. True ownership comes from non-ownership. She smiled, the words no longer distant. She had spent years clinging to ghosts, of patience, of love lost, of identities tied to duty. She had mistaken love for holding on, mistaken care for control. But destiny had taught her something no hospital could. Love wasn't about possession. It was about trust. About choosing presence over permanence. And sometimes, when you let go, what's meant for you finds its way back. She looked toward the clearing, where Destiny now lay in the grass, his body relaxed, his herd safe around him. He hadn't just healed. He had brought healing with him. Evelyn took a deep breath, the air cool and full of pine. For the first time in years, she felt whole. Not because she had returned to who she was, but because she had become something new. Someone who knew how to love without fear. Someone who could let go, and still be full. As night fell and stars blinked alive overhead, she leaned back in her chair. The porch light hummed softly behind her. Destiny lifted his head once more, meeting her gaze. And in the quiet between them, there was peace. She didn't need to say anything. He already knew.